The grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel sparkled under crystal chandeliers as wealthy guests filled the space for the annual charity gala. Among the servers moving gracefully between tables was Marcus, a young man in his early 20s wearing a crisp white shirt and black vest. His hands carried trays with practiced ease, though his eyes occasionally drifted toward the magnificent grand piano sitting on the elevated stage at the far end of the room. Marcus had been working at the hotel for 8 months now, taking every shift he could get. The money helped pay for his tiny apartment and the medical bills that kept piling up. Life had not been kind to him. He grew up in foster care, moving from one home to another, never finding a place where he truly belonged. Music had been his only constant companion, the one thing that made sense when nothing else did. Victoria Ashford sat at table number 3, surrounded by her wealthy friends. She was 28 years old, the daughter of real estate mogul Richard Ashford, and she had never worked a day in her life. Her diamond earrings probably cost more than Marcus would earn in 5 years. She laughed loudly at something her friend said, swirling champagne in her glass as she surveyed the room with an air of superiority. The charity event was supposed to raise money for underprivileged children, but most guests seemed more interested in showing off their expensive clothes and jewelry than actually helping anyone. Victoria had only come because her father insisted it would be good for the family image. She found the whole thing boring and had been complaining about it for the past hour. Marcus approached their table carrying a tray of appetizers. He moved carefully, aware that one wrong step could cost him his job. These wealthy people had no patience for mistakes, and complaints from guests like Victoria could get him fired immediately. He had learned to be invisible, to serve without being noticed, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. As he leaned forward to place a plate in front of Victoria, she suddenly turned without looking and her elbow knocked against the tray. A glass of water tipped over, spilling across the white tablecloth. The cold liquid spread quickly and a few drops landed on Victoria's designer dress. Victoria jumped up from her seat, her face turning red with anger. The entire table went silent and nearby guests turned to look at the commotion. Marcus immediately grabbed a napkin and tried to help, apologizing profusely even though the accident was not entirely his fault. "You clumsy idiot!" Victoria shrieked, her voice cutting through the elegant music playing in the background. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? It's worth more than you'll ever make in your pathetic life." Marcus stood frozen, the napkin still in his hand. His face burned with humiliation as everyone in the nearby tables stared at him. He wanted to defend himself, to explain what had happened, but he knew it would be pointless. People like Victoria never listened to people like him. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he said quietly, keeping his voice steady despite the shame coursing through him. "Please let me help clean this up. I'll cover any cleaning costs from my salary." Victoria's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none of them spoke up to defend Marcus. They were used to Victoria's outbursts and knew better than to get involved. The hotel manager, Mr. Peterson, hurried over after hearing the commotion. He was a middle-aged man who cared more about keeping wealthy clients happy than protecting his employees. "Miss Ashford, I sincerely apologize for this incident," Mr. Peterson said, shooting Marcus an angry look. "This employee will be dealt with immediately. Please allow us to cover your cleaning expenses and provide complimentary services for the inconvenience." Victoria crossed her arms, clearly enjoying the attention and power she held in this moment. Her eyes traveled from Mr. Peterson to Marcus and a cruel smile formed on her lips. She had an idea, one that would provide her with entertainment for the rest of this boring evening. "Actually," she said slowly, her voice dripping with mockery, "I have a better idea. See that piano over there?" She pointed toward the stage. "If this clumsy waiter can play that piano properly, like really play it, not just bang on the keys, I'll forget this whole incident. I'll even give him a generous tip. But if he can't, then he should be fired immediately for ruining my evening." The surrounding guests began whispering among themselves. Some looked uncomfortable with Victoria's cruel game, but others seemed amused by the prospect of watching a poor waiter humiliate himself. Mr. Peterson looked uncertain, caught between protecting his employee and pleasing a valued customer, whose family donated large sums to the hotel. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest. He looked at the piano, then back at Victoria's smirking face. She clearly expected him to refuse or to fail miserably if he tried. She had no idea that she had just handed him the one challenge where he might actually have a chance. Music was the only thing in his difficult life that he had ever been truly good at. "What's the matter?" Victoria taunted. "Too scared to try?" "I thought so. These people never have any real talents. They're only good for serving drinks and taking orders." Her words stung, but they also ignited something inside Marcus. He had spent his entire life being looked down upon, being told he was not good enough, that he did not belong anywhere. He had accepted humiliation as part of his daily existence, but music was different. When he played, he was not just a poor orphan or a struggling waiter. He was something more. Mr. Peterson stepped forward, ready to end this awkward situation and send Marcus back to work. But Marcus spoke up before he could. His voice was quiet but firm. "I'll do it." The ballroom fell silent as Marcus spoke those two simple words. Victoria's eyebrows rose in surprise. She had expected him to refuse or to make excuses, but instead, he had accepted her challenge. This would be even more entertaining than she had imagined. Watching him fail publicly would teach him a lesson about his place in the world. Marcus untied his waiter's apron and handed it to Mr. Peterson, who looked shocked and uncertain about what was happening. The manager wanted to stop this spectacle, but with so many wealthy guests watching, he could not intervene without causing an even bigger scene. He reluctantly took the apron and stepped aside. Walking toward the stage felt like the longest journey Marcus had ever taken. Every eye in the ballroom followed him. He could hear whispers and suppressed laughter from various tables. These people had already decided he would fail. They could not imagine that someone like him, someone who served them food and cleaned their tables, could possess any real talent or worth. Marcus climbed the 3 steps onto the stage. The grand piano sat before him, its polished black surface reflecting the chandelier lights. It was a Steinway, one of the finest pianos money could buy. He had only played on instruments like this a handful of times in his life, usually in music stores when the staff was not watching, or late at night in churches that left their doors unlocked. He sat down on the leather bench and adjusted his position. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the keys. It had been weeks since he had last played. Working double shifts at the hotel left him exhausted, with no time or energy for the music that once filled his days. But the moment his fingers touched the smooth ivory keys, something inside him settled. This was home. This was where he belonged. Victoria leaned back in her chair, a wine glass in her hand, ready to enjoy the show. Her friends watched with anticipation, some of them recording on their phones. They expected chaos, discord, the embarrassing sounds of someone pretending to know something they clearly did not understand. They expected Marcus to prove their assumptions right. Marcus took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He thought about his life, about all the years of struggle and loneliness. He thought about the foster homes that never wanted to keep him, the schools where he never quite fit in, the constant feeling of being invisible and worthless. But he also thought about the one teacher who had believed in him, Mrs. Chen, who had given him his first real piano lessons when he was just 12 years old. Mrs. Chen had been his music teacher in one of the foster homes. She was old and kind, and she saw something in Marcus that no one else had noticed. She spent her own time teaching him after school, never asking for anything in return. She told him that music was a language that everyone could speak, that it could express feelings when words failed. She said he had a gift, a real gift, and that he should never let the world convince him otherwise. His fingers began to move across the keys. The first notes that filled the ballroom were soft and gentle, like raindrops on a window. He started with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece Mrs. Chen had taught him during their last lesson before she passed away. The melody was beautiful and melancholic, speaking of loss and longing, of beauty found in sadness. The whispers in the ballroom stopped. People who had been laughing moments ago now sat completely still. The music flowing from the piano was not what anyone had expected. It was not the amateur fumbling of someone who had taken a few casual lessons. This was real, trained, masterful playing. Each note was precise yet filled with emotion, technically perfect yet deeply human. Victoria's smile faded from her face. She sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes fixed on Marcus. She had been so certain he would embarrass himself, so sure that her cruel joke would put him in his place. Instead, she found herself listening to music that stirred something unexpected inside her. She tried to dismiss the feeling, to remind herself that he was just a waiter, but the music would not allow her to look away or remain unmoved. Marcus transitioned seamlessly into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, his fingers dancing across the keys with increasing confidence. The familiar piece took on new depth under his touch. He played with his eyes closed, lost in the music, finally free from the weight of judgment and expectation. In this moment, he was not poor or orphaned or struggling. He was simply Marcus, and music was his voice. The technical difficulty of what he was playing became increasingly apparent to the few musically educated guests in the room. This was not simple playing. This required years of dedicated practice, natural talent, and deep understanding of the music. His hands moved with fluid grace, crossing over each other effortlessly, striking complex chord progressions and rapid runs of notes without a single mistake. Mr. Peterson stood near the kitchen door, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. He had employed Marcus for 8 months and had no idea the young man possessed such extraordinary talent. He felt a wave of shame wash over him, realizing how quickly he had been ready to sacrifice Marcus to please a demanding customer, never considering that there might be more to his employee than he assumed. An elderly woman at table 7 had tears streaming down her face. She was Margaret Harrison, a retired concert pianist who had performed at Carnegie Hall in her youth. She recognized immediately that she was witnessing something special. The young man on stage was not just technically proficient. He played with soul, with genuine feeling that could not be taught or faked. She wondered what circumstances had led someone with such ability to be working as a waiter instead of performing on the world's great stages. Marcus moved into his final piece, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. It was one of the most demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, known for its dramatic intensity and technical challenges. His hands flew across the keys with power and precision. The music built to thunderous crescendos, then dropped to whispers, taking the entire room on an emotional journey. Victoria gripped her wineglass so tightly her knuckles turned white. She watched Marcus with an expression that was difficult to read, something between shock, shame, and something else she could not quite identify. Her friends had long since stopped recording. They sat in stunned silence, witnessing something that challenged everything they believed about class and worth and who deserved respect. The final notes of the Rachmaninoff piece rang out through the ballroom, powerful and defiant, then faded into silence. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys and opened his eyes. For a moment, no one moved. The entire room was frozen in stunned silence. Then slowly, one person began to clap. The applause started with Margaret Harrison, the elderly pianist. She rose from her seat, clapping with genuine enthusiasm and tears still fresh on her cheeks. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted. People stood from their tables, applauding wildly. Some whistled and cheered. The sound was thunderous and overwhelming. Marcus sat at the piano, completely stunned. He had played for himself, lost in the music, barely aware of his surroundings. Now facing the standing ovation, reality crashed back around him. These same people who had been laughing at him minutes ago were now on their feet, celebrating his performance. It felt surreal and confusing. He stood up slowly from the piano bench, unsure of what to do. He gave a small, awkward bow, his face flushed with a mixture of emotions. Relief, pride, disbelief, and lingering pain from Victoria's earlier words all swirled together inside him. He walked off the stage on shaky legs, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Victoria remained in her seat. She was the only person in the immediate area who had not stood up to applaud. Her friends were all standing, clapping enthusiastically, exchanging excited comments about the unexpected performance. But Victoria sat frozen, her face pale, the wineglass still clutched in her hand. She stared at Marcus as he descended from the stage, and for the first time in her privileged life, she felt truly ashamed. Margaret Harrison made her way through the crowd toward Marcus. Despite her age, she moved with purpose and determination. When she reached him, she took both of his hands in hers, her eyes bright with emotion and excitement. "Young man," she said in a voice that trembled with feeling, "that was extraordinary. I have attended concerts at the finest halls in the world, and what you just played rivals anything I have heard. Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" Marcus looked down at the elderly woman's kind face and felt his throat tighten with emotion. No one had asked him about his music in such a long time. No one had treated it as something valuable and real. "I had a teacher when I was younger, Mrs. Chen," he said quietly. "She taught me for about 4 years before she passed away. After that, I taught myself using books and online videos. I practiced wherever I could find a piano. usually in churches or music stores when no one was watching. Margaret's eyes widened with astonishment. Self-taught? For all these years? And you can play Rachmaninoff with that level of skill? She shook her head in disbelief. My dear boy, you have a gift. A truly remarkable gift. This cannot be wasted. You should be studying at a conservatory, performing, sharing this talent with the world. Other guests had gathered around now, offering congratulations and asking questions. Business cards were pressed into Marcus's hands. A music professor from the local university wanted to discuss scholarship opportunities. A woman who organized classical concerts said she could arrange a performance for him. The attention was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Mr. Peterson pushed through the small crowd, his earlier anger completely forgotten. His face showed a mixture of embarrassment and newfound respect. He looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, not just as an employee but as a complete human being with depth and value. Marcus, the manager said, clearing his throat awkwardly, I want to apologize for how I reacted earlier. I should have supported you instead of immediately taking the customer's side. That was wrong of me. You're a valued member of our team, and what you just demonstrated was truly incredible. Marcus nodded. Accepting the apology, though, it did not erase the sting of how quickly his boss had been ready to throw him aside. He appreciated the words, but they came too late to fully heal the wound. He had learned a hard truth tonight about how easily people could dismiss him when he was viewed as beneath them. Through the crowd, Marcus's eyes found Victoria. She was still sitting at her table, alone now since all her friends had moved forward to see what the excitement was about. She looked small somehow, diminished, her earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like shame and confusion. Their eyes met across the room, and she quickly looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Margaret was still holding Marcus's hand, unwilling to let this extraordinary young man disappear back into obscurity. She had been in the music world for over 50 years and knew talent when she saw it. More than that, she recognized something in Marcus that touched her deeply. She saw someone who loved music the way she had once loved it, with pure passion and dedication, before fame and success had complicated everything. Marcus, she said firmly, I want to help you. I have connections in the music world, and I know people at several prestigious conservatories. What you have is too precious to waste. Will you allow me to make some calls on your behalf? Before Marcus could respond, Victoria suddenly stood up from her table. She walked toward them with hesitant steps, her confidence from earlier completely gone. She looked like someone walking toward an execution, dreading what she knew she had to do but unable to avoid it any longer. Her friends watched her with curiosity, unsure what she was planning. Victoria stopped a few feet away from Marcus and Margaret. She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting with the small designer purse she carried. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier cruelty and mockery. I need to apologize, she said, looking directly at Marcus. What I said earlier, the way I treated you, it was wrong. Completely wrong. I was cruel and arrogant, and I judged you based on your job without knowing anything about who you really are. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. The nearby guests who heard her fell silent, watching this unexpected turn of events. Apologies did not come easily to people like Victoria. She had been raised in a world where admitting fault was seen as weakness, where power meant never having to say sorry to those below your social standing. But tonight something had shifted inside her. Marcus studied her face, trying to determine if the apology was genuine or just a performance for the watching crowd. He saw real shame in her eyes, real regret, and it softened something inside him. He knew what it was like to make mistakes, to act out of pain and insecurity. He also knew that holding on to anger would only hurt him more in the end. I accept your apology, he said simply. We all have bad moments. I hope you'll think differently about people like me in the future. Victoria nodded, blinking back tears that threatened to fall. She was not used to crying, especially not in public, but the emotions swirling inside her were too powerful to completely control. She had been raised to believe that her money and status made her better than others, that people who served her were fundamentally different and lesser. In 10 minutes of music, Marcus had shattered that illusion completely. Margaret watched this exchange with interest. She was a shrewd judge of character, developed over decades of dealing with musicians and their often complicated personalities. She saw potential in Victoria, not the spoiled woman who had created this scene, but someone underneath who was capable of growth and change. An idea began forming in her mind, one that seemed almost too perfect but felt absolutely right. Margaret Harrison turned to Victoria with a thoughtful expression. The old pianist had lived long enough to recognize moments that could change lives, and she sensed one happening right now. She had watched Victoria's transformation from cruel mockery to genuine remorse, and something told her this young woman needed redemption as much as Marcus needed opportunity. "Miss Ashford," Margaret said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. "I couldn't help but overhear your name earlier. You're Richard Ashford's daughter, correct?" Victoria nodded, surprised to be addressed directly by the elegant elderly woman. "Yes, I am." "Do you know my father?" "We've met at several charity functions over the years," Margaret replied. "He's mentioned you often. I know you're involved in your family's foundation work, or at least you're supposed to be." There was a gentle reproach in her tone that made Victoria flush with embarrassment. Margaret continued, "I have a proposition, one that might benefit both you and Marcus here, if you're willing to listen and to be honest with yourself." The small crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing something important was about to happen. Marcus looked confused, unsure where this was going. Victoria appeared nervous but attentive, her earlier defenses completely stripped away by the events of the evening. "Marcus needs support to develop his extraordinary talent," Margaret explained. "He needs financial backing for music school, for proper instruments to practice on, for the time to focus on his art instead of working multiple shifts to survive. You, Miss Ashford, need to understand what real value looks like. You need to learn that worth is not measured by bank accounts or designer clothes." Victoria opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. She could not argue with the truth of those words, not after what she had witnessed tonight. She had lived her entire life in a bubble of privilege, never questioning her assumptions about people or the world. Margaret's eyes sparkled with an idea that was growing clearer by the moment. "I propose that you sponsor Marcus. Provide him with the financial support he needs to attend the Manhattan Conservatory, where I taught for 30 years and still have significant influence. In return, you will be actively involved in his journey, not as a distant patron but as someone who shows up, who learns about his world, who understands what dedication and real talent look like." Marcus's eyes went wide. The Manhattan Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. He had dreamed of studying there but knew it was impossibly beyond his reach. The tuition alone was more than he would earn in several years of waiting tables. The idea that this might actually be possible felt like a fantasy. Victoria looked stunned. "You want me to sponsor him? To pay for his education?" "I want you to invest in something meaningful," Margaret corrected gently. "Your family foundation gives money to various causes, I'm sure. This would be more personal, more transformative, for both of you. Marcus would get the education and support he deserves, and you would learn what it means to truly help someone, to be part of something bigger than yourself." The ballroom had gone almost completely silent. Even the servers who had been Marcus's colleagues stood watching from the sidelines, amazed by the turn of events. This was not how evenings at the Westfield Hotel typically ended. The wealthy guests were witnessing something far more valuable than any charity auction or fundraising appeal. They were watching real human connection and potential redemption unfold before their eyes. Victoria looked at Marcus, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. She saw beyond the waiter's uniform to the young man who had moved an entire room to tears with his music. She thought about her own empty life, filled with shopping and parties and meaningless social obligations. She thought about how hollow she felt most days, how bored and purposeless her existence had become. Maybe this was a chance to do something that actually mattered. What would this involve exactly? Victoria asked, her voice uncertain but not dismissive. "I mean, I want to help, I do, but I don't know anything about music or conservatories or any of this." Margaret smiled, pleased that Victoria had not immediately refused. "It would mean covering his tuition, housing and living expenses while he studies. It would mean attending his performances, supporting him through the challenges that come with intensive musical training. It would mean being present and invested, not just writing checks and walking away." Marcus found his voice overwhelmed by what was being discussed. "This is incredible, truly incredible, but I can't ask someone to do that for me. That's too much. I'm nobody, just a waiter who can play piano. Why would anyone invest that kind of money in me?" Margaret turned to him with a firm but kind expression. "You are not nobody, Marcus. You are a remarkably talented musician who deserves a chance to develop that talent. And Miss Ashford here needs to understand that the best investments are not always in stocks or real estate. Sometimes they are in people and potential in the future of art itself. She paused, then added with a slight smile. Besides, I saw the video one of the guests was recording. It is already spreading on social media. By tomorrow, thousands of people will have seen your performance. The story of the waiter who played Rachmaninoff will be everywhere. Miss Ashford, if you sponsor Marcus, you will be part of a beautiful story of redemption and opportunity. Your family's foundation could use some genuinely positive publicity, I suspect. Victoria's mind raced. Margaret was right about the publicity angle. Her father's company had been dealing with some negative press lately about a real estate development that displaced low-income families. Being part of a story like this could help repair their image. But more than that, something deeper stirred inside her. She wanted to be better than the person who had mocked Marcus earlier. She wanted to do something meaningful. "I'll do it," Victoria said suddenly, surprising herself with the decisiveness in her voice. "I'll sponsor his education, all of it. Whatever he needs." Marcus looked like he might cry. His hands trembled as he processed what was happening. In the space of an hour, he had gone from being humiliated and nearly fired to being offered a full scholarship to one of the world's best music schools, sponsored by the very person who had mocked him. Life could change so fast, so unexpectedly. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, looking between Victoria and Marcus with a mischievous glint in her eye. "When I said you should be actively involved, I meant it. I want you to attend classes with Marcus. Not the performance classes, of course, but the music theory, history, and appreciation courses. You need to understand his world, and he needs to know that you're genuinely invested in this, not just buying your way out of guilt." Victoria's face showed surprise, then consideration, then acceptance. "Okay," she agreed. "I'll do it. I'll attend the classes." The nearby guests burst into spontaneous applause. Some were moved by the unexpected resolution. Others were simply relieved that the evening had taken such a positive turn. Mr. Peterson looked enormously relieved that his hotel had become the setting for an uplifting story rather than a scandal. The other servers watched Marcus with a mixture of happiness for him and sadness that they were losing a colleague. Margaret pulled out her phone and began making notes. "I'll contact the conservatory first thing Monday morning. Marcus, can you come to my home this weekend? We need to discuss your goals, prepare your application materials, and get you ready for this opportunity. This is going to change your life, young man. Are you ready for that?" 3 months had passed since that extraordinary night at the Westfield Hotel. Marcus now lived in a small but comfortable apartment near the Manhattan Conservatory campus, paid for through Victoria's sponsorship. The cramped studio had a beautiful upright piano in the corner, the first instrument he had ever truly owned. Every morning he woke up and spent a moment just looking at it, still unable to believe this was his real life. The conservatory had accepted him immediately after Margaret arranged an audition with the dean. His entrance performance had left the faculty stunned. They had never heard anyone play with such raw emotion combined with technical precision. The story of the viral video had preceded him, and several professors were eager to work with this unusual student who had taught himself so much. Classes were intense and demanding. Marcus was surrounded by students who had been groomed for music careers since childhood, who had expensive private tutors and came from families where classical music was a way of life. He often felt out of place, aware of the gaps in his formal training, worried that he did not belong among these polished, educated musicians. But he worked harder than anyone else, practicing until his fingers ached, staying late in the practice rooms determined to prove he deserved this opportunity. Victoria had kept her word about attending classes. She showed up to Music History 101 on the first day, looking distinctly uncomfortable in jeans and a casual sweater, instead of her usual designer outfits. The other students, mostly young music majors, had no idea who she was or why a non-musician would audit their course. She sat in the back row trying to be invisible. At first, Victoria found the classes boring. She could not understand why anyone cared about medieval church modes or the difference between Baroque and classical period compositions. It all seemed dry and irrelevant. But Professor Williams, an passionate educator in his 60s, taught with such enthusiasm that it was infectious. He played examples on his violin, told stories about the composers' lives, connected the music to the historical periods that produced it. Slowly, despite herself, Victoria began to pay attention. She started understanding why certain pieces of music sounded the way they did, how composers were influenced by the events of their times, how music could be a form of protest or celebration or mourning. The world of classical music, which she had always dismissed as stuffy and boring, revealed layers of meaning she had never suspected existed. Marcus and Victoria barely spoke during those first weeks. They nodded awkwardly when they saw each other in the hallways. Victoria attended his required recitals, sitting in the audience and watching him perform. But they did not interact beyond polite greetings. There was still too much discomfort between them, too much history from that night when she had tried to humiliate him. One afternoon, Marcus was practicing in one of the small rehearsal rooms. He was working on a particularly difficult passage from a Liszt etude, playing the same section over and over, trying to get his fingers to move faster without sacrificing accuracy. He was so focused that he did not notice when the door opened slightly, and someone stood watching. Victoria had been walking past when she heard the music. She recognized the piece from one of her classes where Professor Williams had played a recording of it. Curious, she peeked through the small window in the door and saw Marcus at the piano, his face intense with concentration. She watched him practice the same 20 seconds of music repeatedly, each time making tiny adjustments, never satisfied, always pushing himself to do better. She had never seen anyone work like this. Her entire life, things had come easily because of her family's money. If she wanted something, she bought it. If she needed to learn something, she hired someone to teach her. The idea of this kind of dedicated, solitary struggle was foreign to her. Marcus had no safety net, no backup plan. This was everything to him. The door creaked slightly as Victoria shifted her weight and Marcus looked up startled. Their eyes met through the window. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Marcus gestured for her to come in. Victoria hesitated, then pushed the door open. "Sorry," she said quietly, stepping into the small room. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I heard the music and I recognized it from class. Liszt, right?" Marcus nodded, surprised she knew. "Yeah, one of his transcendental etudes. I'm playing it in my recital next week and I can't get this one section right. My fingers keep tangling up at the fast part." Victoria moved closer to the piano, genuinely curious. "Can I ask you something? How do you memorize all of this?" Professor Williams mentioned that concert pianists often perform entire programs from memory. "That seems impossible." Marcus smiled slightly. It was the first real conversation they had shared since that night at the hotel. "It's not as hard as it sounds once you understand the structure. Music has patterns. Once you see how the piece is built, how the harmonies progress, it becomes more logical. It's like remembering a story rather than random words." He started playing a simpler piece, a Mozart sonata, and explained as he went how the themes repeated and varied, how certain chord progressions signaled transitions, how understanding the composer's intentions made memorization natural. Victoria listened, fascinated. For the first time, she was hearing music explained not as something mysterious and complicated, but as something comprehensible and structured. "That actually makes sense," she said when he finished. "I always thought classical music was just for people who were born understanding it somehow. I didn't realize there was logic to it." Marcus looked at her thoughtfully. "That's what a lot of people think. They see it as this elite thing that's not for them. But music is just another language. Anyone can learn it if they have a chance and someone to teach them." Something shifted in that moment between them. The barrier of discomfort began to crack. They were no longer the rich girl and the poor waiter. They were just two people talking about music in a practice room, connected by their shared experience of learning something new and challenging. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself stopping by Marcus's practice sessions more often. She would sit quietly in the corner, doing her homework for the music classes while he practiced. Sometimes he would take breaks and explain what he was working on, and she would ask questions that showed she was actually paying attention in their classes. A tentative friendship began to form. Professor Williams noticed Victoria's growing engagement with the material. She had gone from a distracted, disinterested auditor to someone who actively participated in discussions and submitted thoughtful written responses to the listening assignments. One day after class, he asked her to stay behind. "Miss Ashford," he said with a warm smile, "I've been teaching for 40 years and I've seen many students pass through these doors. But I rarely see someone's relationship with music transform the way yours has. May I ask what changed?" Victoria thought about how to answer. "I guess I'm learning that things I thought didn't matter actually do matter. Music seemed pointless to me before. Now I'm starting to understand that it's about human experience. about expressing things that can't be said with words. I never realized art could be important like that. Professor Williams nodded approvingly. That's a profound realization. Many people go their whole lives without understanding that. The fact that you're discovering it now means you're truly learning, not just memorizing facts for exams. That evening, Victoria met her father for dinner at an expensive restaurant. Richard Ashford was a busy man, and these dinners were scheduled weeks in advance. He looked tired, stressed from dealing with various business problems. Victoria had always found these dinners awkward, full of long silences and forced conversation about topics that did not interest either of them. "So," Richard said after they had ordered, "how's your charity project going? The musician you're sponsoring?" Victoria bristled slightly at the term charity project, but she pushed down her irritation. "His name is Marcus, and he's doing incredibly well. His professors say he's one of the most talented students they've ever had." "That's good," Richard said, barely listening as he checked his phone. "Good publicity for the company. The media coverage has been very positive. Your mother is pleased." Victoria put down her fork and looked at her father directly. "Dad, this isn't about publicity. I'm actually learning things. I'm attending classes at the conservatory, and it's changing how I see the world. Music isn't just background noise. It's art, it's history, it's human expression. I never understood that before." Richard finally looked up from his phone, surprised by the passion in his daughter's voice. He could not remember the last time she had spoken with such genuine enthusiasm about anything. Usually their conversations consisted of her complaining about being bored or asking for money to go shopping with her friends. "You're attending classes?" he asked, setting his phone aside. "Why?" "Because I want to understand what I'm supporting," Victoria explained. "Margaret Harrison suggested it, and at first I thought it was ridiculous. But now I'm glad I did it. I'm learning about composers and musical periods and how pieces are structured. I'm starting to hear things in music I never noticed before." Richard studied his daughter's face, seeing something different there. She looked animated and engaged in a way he had not seen since she was a small child. Before the teenage years had brought rebellion and distance, before she had become absorbed in the shallow world of her wealthy friends, Victoria had been curious and eager to learn. He had almost forgotten that version of his daughter existed. "Tell me about him," Richard said, genuinely interested now. "This Marcus. What's his story?" Victoria found herself talking about Marcus's background, his time in foster care, his self-taught musical education, his dedication to practicing. She talked about watching him work for hours on a single piece, never satisfied until it was perfect. She talked about how he helped other students even though he was struggling himself, how he stayed humble despite his extraordinary talent. "He makes me feel like I've wasted my whole life," Victoria admitted quietly. "I've had every advantage, every opportunity, and I've done nothing with it. He's had nothing and managed to create something beautiful anyway. It makes me wonder what I'm even doing with my life." Richard was silent for a long moment. He thought about his own life, about building a real estate empire through ruthless business practices, about the people he had displaced and the communities he had disrupted in pursuit of profit. His daughter's words touched something he had been avoiding for years. The question of whether success measured purely in money was really success at all. "Maybe this sponsorship is good for both of you," he said finally. "Maybe you needed to meet someone like Marcus as much as he needed your help." The conversation continued, deeper and more honest than any they had shared in years. For the first time, Victoria talked to her father not as a rebellious child or a disappointed daughter, but as an adult grappling with real questions about meaning and purpose. Richard found himself respecting her in a way he had not before. Meanwhile, at the conservatory, Marcus was having his own moment of reflection. He sat in his apartment after a long day of classes and practice, exhausted but happy. His phone buzzed with a message from his old friend Danny, someone he had met during one of his foster home placements years ago. Danny still worked multiple low-wage jobs, still struggled to make rent, still lived the life Marcus had escaped. They met for coffee at a cheap diner near Marcus's old neighborhood. Danny looked tired and worn down in a way that made Marcus's heart ache. They had been close once, had supported each other through difficult times, and Marcus felt guilty about his changed circumstances. "Man, look at you," Danny said with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Living the dream. Fancy music school, nice apartment, all expenses paid. You really made it out. Marcus heard the edge in his friend's voice, the unspoken resentment mixed with genuine happiness. It still doesn't feel real sometimes, Marcus admitted. I keep waiting to wake up and find out it was all a dream. You deserve it, though, Danny said. And this time the smile was more genuine. You always had that talent. I remember you playing on that broken keyboard in the group home, making beautiful music on those stuck keys. If anyone was going to make it, it should be you. They talked for an hour about old times, about the other kids from their foster homes, about who had succeeded and who had fallen through the cracks. Many of their friends had ended up in difficult situations, trapped by circumstances and lack of opportunities. Marcus had been lucky, incredibly lucky, to have his musical talent recognized at the right moment by the right people. I want to do something, Marcus said suddenly. Once I graduate, once I'm established, I want to help kids like us. Kids in foster care who have talents but no opportunities. There has to be a way to find them and give them chances. Danny looked at his friend with respect. You're thinking about this already? Most people would just enjoy their success and forget where they came from. I can't forget, Marcus said quietly. Every day I'm at the conservatory surrounded by kids who've had private lessons since they were 5, who never had to worry about money or stability. I remember how different my path was. If Victoria hadn't sponsored me, if Margaret hadn't believed in me, I would still be waiting tables. That can't be the only way for talented kids to succeed. The idea took root in Marcus's mind. He started researching programs that helped underprivileged youth access arts education. He discovered there were some initiatives, but not nearly enough, and most were underfunded and struggling. He began sketching out ideas for a foundation that could identify talented young people in foster care and provide them with support, not just financial, but also mentorship and guidance. A week later, Marcus had his major recital. The performance hall was packed with students, faculty, and guests. Margaret Harrison sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Victoria was there too, nervous for Marcus even though she knew he would be brilliant. She had heard him practice these pieces dozens of times and knew every note by heart. Marcus walked onto the stage in a borrowed suit, looking more confident than he had 3 months ago. The boy who had trembled while walking to the piano at the hotel gala had been transformed by intensive training and growing self-assurance. He sat at the concert grand piano and began to play. His program included works by Chopin, Beethoven, and Rachmaninoff, the same composers he had played that fateful night. But his playing had evolved. The raw emotion was still there, but now it was coupled with greater technical control and deeper understanding of the music. He had learned to balance feeling with precision, passion with discipline. The audience sat mesmerized. Even the jaded music students who attended these recitals constantly had to admit this was special. Marcus did not just play notes correctly. He told stories with his music, conveyed emotions that bypassed the intellect and went straight to the heart. This was what separated good musicians from great ones, the ability to move people, to create moments of transcendence. When the final notes faded, there was a brief silence, then thunderous applause. Marcus stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. His eyes found Victoria in the audience, and she was clapping enthusiastically, tears running down her face. He thought about how far they had both come since that night when she had mocked him. They had both been changed by their unlikely connection. After the recital, there was a small reception. Faculty members congratulated Marcus and discussed his future prospects. Several mentioned competitions he should enter, summer programs that would further his development, potential performance opportunities. The path forward was becoming clearer, and it was more promising than he had ever imagined possible. Victoria approached him during a quiet moment, holding a glass of punch and looking slightly awkward. Despite months of attending classes and recitals, she still felt out of place in this world of serious musicians and academic discussions about art. But she was trying, genuinely trying to bridge the gap between her old life and this new understanding she was developing. That was incredible, she said simply. I've heard you practice those pieces so many times, but hearing them performed like that, in front of an audience, it was different. More powerful. Marcus smiled, grateful for her presence and support. Thank you. And thank you for being here. I know this isn't really your world. It's becoming my world a little bit, Victoria said thoughtfully. I'm starting to understand why this matters so much to you. Why you're willing to work so hard for it. Art isn't just decoration or entertainment. It's something deeper. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the other guests mingle and celebrate. Margaret Harrison caught Marcus's eye from across the room and gave him a knowing smile. She had orchestrated this connection between two unlikely people, and it was working out better than she could have hoped. Both of them were growing and learning from each other. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, her voice tentative, "about what happens after you graduate. You have so much talent, and I know you'll be successful. But I also heard you talking to that professor about wanting to help other kids like you. Kids in foster care who have talents but no opportunities." Marcus looked at her with surprise. "You heard that conversation?" "I was walking by and overheard part of it," Victoria admitted. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but it got me thinking. My family's foundation has resources. What if we created a program specifically for this? We could call it the Harrison Marcus Initiative, named after you and Margaret, to find and support talented young people in foster care." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You would do that? Create a whole program? Why not?" Victoria asked. "I've been sitting on the board of my family's foundation for 2 years, and I've never cared about any of the causes we support. But this matters to me. You've shown me that there are probably dozens or hundreds of kids out there with amazing talents who will never get a chance to develop them because they don't have support or resources or luck. We could change that." The idea excited her in a way nothing had in years. She could already imagine the program, not just throwing money at the problem, but creating real structure and support. Music lessons, art supplies, mentorship programs, connections to schools and opportunities. They could make a genuine difference in young people's lives. Marcus grabbed Victoria's hand impulsively. "This is amazing. Can we really do this? Can we make it happen?" "I think we can," Victoria said, squeezing his hand back. "I'll talk to my father and Margaret. Between the foundation's resources and Margaret's connections in the arts world, we could build something meaningful, something that lasts beyond just helping one person." Margaret joined them, having noticed their animated conversation. When they explained the idea, her face lit up with enthusiasm. "This is exactly what the world needs. There is so much talent that goes to waste simply because young people lack access and support. With proper structure and funding, you could change countless lives." The three of them spent the next hour discussing possibilities and logistics. Victoria pulled out her phone and started making notes, her business mind kicking in as she thought about budgets and timelines and program structures. Marcus contributed ideas based on his own experiences, knowing exactly what kind of support would have helped him years ago. Margaret provided her extensive knowledge of music education and her connections to institutions that could partner with them. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. He had started this journey as a struggling waiter who happened to play piano. Now he was a conservatory student with a promising future, and he had the opportunity to help others find their own paths. The cruel moment when Victoria had mocked him had somehow transformed into this beautiful collaboration that could impact many lives. 2 years had passed since that transformative night at the Westfield Hotel. The story of Marcus and Victoria had become something of a legend, shared across social media and covered by news outlets, fascinated by the unlikely friendship between a former waiter and a wealthy heiress. But the real story was happening away from the cameras and headlines, in the quiet, steady work of building something meaningful. Marcus had graduated from the conservatory with highest honors. His senior recital had been attended by music critics from major publications, and the reviews were glowing. Offers came in from concert halls wanting him to perform, from recording companies interested in producing his debut album, from international competitions inviting him to participate. The poor boy who had taught himself piano was now being called one of the most promising classical pianists of his generation. But Marcus had not forgotten his larger purpose. Between performances and recording sessions, he dedicated himself to the Harrison Marcus Initiative, the foundation he had created with Victoria and Margaret. They had officially launched the program 18 months ago with funding from the Ashford Family Foundation and donations from other wealthy patrons who had been moved by Marcus's story. The initiative identified talented young people in foster care across the country, not just musicians but artists, writers, dancers, and creators of all kinds. They provided comprehensive support including lessons with professional teachers, quality instruments or supplies, mentorship from established artists, help with college applications, and financial assistance for education, In its first year, the program had helped 43 young people, and the results were already remarkable. Victoria had transformed completely from the person she had been that night at the gala. She now served as the executive director of the initiative, working full-time to manage the program and expand its reach. She had completed a certificate program in arts administration and had proven to have genuine skill in organization and fundraising. Her connections in wealthy circles, once used only for parties and shopping, now opened doors for the foundation. She knew how to talk to potential donors, how to make them care about causes they had never considered before. Her father had been skeptical at first, worried that she was just going through a phase or trying to rebel against him in some new way. But watching her work 12-hour days, seeing her genuine passion for helping these young people, he had come to respect her in ways he never had before. Richard Ashford had even become more involved himself, using his business expertise to help structure the foundation for long-term sustainability. Margaret Harrison, now 84 years old, served as the artistic advisor for the initiative. Despite her age, she remained sharp and engaged, personally evaluating applications and connecting young artists with appropriate mentors. She called this work the most fulfilling thing she had done in her long career, more meaningful than her own performances at the world's great concert halls. On a sunny afternoon in May, the foundation held its second annual showcase event. Young artists, supported by the initiative, performed for an audience of donors, press, and supporters. The venue was a beautiful theater in Manhattan, donated for the event by a foundation board member. Marcus sat backstage, helping a nervous 15-year-old violinist prepare for her performance. The girl's name was Jasmine, and her story reminded Marcus painfully of his own. She had bounced between foster homes, carrying her violin everywhere she went, because it was the only thing she truly owned. A music teacher at her school had nominated her for the initiative after hearing her play. Now she studied with a former member of the New York Philharmonic and had just been accepted to a prestigious performing arts high school with a full scholarship arranged by the foundation. "I'm so scared," Jasmine whispered, clutching her violin. "What if I mess up in front of all these important people?" Marcus smiled and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I was terrified too when I had to play for people the first time. Really play for them instead of just background music. But you know what? They're not here to judge you. They're here because they believe in you, because they want to support your talent. Just play the way you play when you're alone and it's just you and the music." Jasmine nodded, taking deep breaths to calm herself. Marcus watched her walk onto the stage and begin her performance, a Bach partita that she played with remarkable maturity and feeling. The audience was captivated. He thought about how different his life might have been if someone had found him at 15 and given him this kind of support. Maybe he would have gotten to music school earlier, would have had more years to develop his craft, but maybe everything had happened exactly as it needed to. Victoria joined him in the wings, watching Jasmine's performance with a proud smile. She wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, a far cry from the excessive displays of wealth that had once defined her. She had sold most of her designer clothes and expensive accessories, finding that she no longer needed those things to feel valuable or important. Her worth came from the work she did, from the lives she helped change. "She's incredible," Victoria whispered to Marcus. "When I think about the fact that she might never have been discovered, that her talent could have been wasted, it makes me angry at how many others we're still missing. We need to expand the program, reach more cities, find more kids like her." "We will," Marcus assured her. "We're growing steadily, and every kid we help becomes an advocate for others. They go back to their communities and tell their stories, and more teachers and social workers start looking for talented young people who need support. It's building momentum." After Jasmine's performance, there were several others, including a young painter whose work had recently been featured in a gallery show, a poet whose writing had won a national competition, and a dancer who had just been accepted into a prestigious ballet company's training program. Each performance or presentation was introduced with a brief video telling the young person's story, showing their journey from struggling in foster care to pursuing their artistic dreams. The audience was moved to tears multiple times throughout the evening. These were not just feel-good stories or charity cases. These were genuinely talented young people who had been given opportunities they deserved, and they were making the most of those chances. The program was proving that talent existed everywhere, in every economic class and social circumstance, and that investing in young people paid dividends not just for them, but for the entire culture. During the reception after the performances, Marcus found himself talking to a middle-aged woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She was a professor of psychology who studied resilience and success in foster youth. She had been following the initiative's work and wanted to meet Marcus. "What you're doing is remarkable," Dr. Mitchell said earnestly. "My research shows that foster youth face enormous barriers to success, not because they lack talent or intelligence, but because they lack stable support systems and opportunities. Your program addresses this in such a comprehensive way. You're not just giving handouts. You're providing the kind of consistent support and belief that most young people get from their families." Marcus felt validated hearing this from someone who studied these issues professionally. "That's exactly what we're trying to do. I remember how much it meant when my music teacher, Mrs. Chen, believed in me. She saw something in me that no one else had noticed. We want every kid in our program to have that experience of being truly seen and valued." Dr. Mitchell pulled out her business card. "I'd love to collaborate with your foundation on some research. We could track outcomes for your participants and demonstrate the effectiveness of this model. That data could help you attract more funding and expand to other cities. It could also influence policy around supporting foster youth." Marcus took the card enthusiastically. This was exactly the kind of partnership that could take the initiative to the next level. They exchanged contact information and agreed to set up a meeting to discuss possibilities. Across the room, Victoria was talking to a potential major donor, a tech entrepreneur who had made billions and was looking for meaningful ways to use his wealth. She explained the program with passion and specificity, sharing detailed outcomes and future plans. The entrepreneur was impressed by her knowledge and dedication. By the end of the conversation, he had pledged a 7-figure donation to expand the program to 5 new cities. As the evening wound down, Marcus, Victoria, and Margaret gathered in a quiet corner of the venue. They were exhausted but happy, energized by the success of the event and the young people they had celebrated. Margaret raised her glass of sparkling water in a toast. "To unlikely beginnings," she said with a warm smile. "To a moment of cruelty that became an opportunity for grace. To a young man who played piano and changed not just his own life but many others. To a young woman who learned that true worth comes from what you give, not what you have. And to all the talented young people out there waiting to be discovered and supported." They clinked glasses and drank. Marcus looked at Victoria and saw not the cruel girl who had mocked him that night, but a true friend and partner in meaningful work. She had grown and changed in ways neither of them could have predicted. He had forgiven her long ago, but more than that, he was grateful for her. Without that terrible moment at the hotel, none of this would exist. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, "about what the initiative means in the bigger picture. We're helping individual kids, which is wonderful and important, but we're also making a statement about value and potential. We're saying that talent isn't limited to people with money and privilege. We're proving that there are brilliant artists everywhere, and society benefits when we support all of them, not just the ones who happen to be born into the right families." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's what Mrs. Chen tried to teach me years ago. She said music was a universal language, that anyone could speak it if they were given the chance to learn. I think that's true for all art. And when we silence voices because of poverty or circumstance, we lose something precious. We lose perspectives and stories and beauty that the world needs." Margaret looked at her 2 young protégés with deep satisfaction. She was old enough to know that most good intentions fade with time, that most charitable impulses peter out when they become hard work. But Marcus and Victoria had proven different. They had sustained their commitment through challenges and setbacks, through the hard work of building something that lasted. This was her legacy now, perhaps more important than her own musical career had been. The 3 of them stayed talking long after the other guests had left, planning future expansions and dreaming about what the initiative could become. They talked about creating regional centers where young artists could come for intensive training during summers. They discussed partnering with universities to provide full scholarships for program participants. They imagined a network of artist mentors across the country, successful professionals who would volunteer their time to guide talented youth. Marcus eventually walked out into the warm spring night, heading back to his apartment. He had a concert next week at Carnegie Hall, a solo recital that was already sold out. The reviews would probably compare him to the great pianists of the generation. His career was taking off in ways he had never dared to imagine back when he was serving drinks at the hotel. But as he walked through the city streets, what filled his heart was not the upcoming concert, or the praise or the success. It was the memory of Jasmine's face when she finished her performance tonight, the joy and relief and pride. It was knowing that 43 young people were sleeping tonight with hope for their futures, with someone believing in them and supporting their dreams. It was understanding that his gift for music had become a gift to others. He thought about that night 2 years ago when Victoria had mocked him, when she had challenged him to play the piano or be fired. In that moment of humiliation, he could never have imagined it would lead here. Life had a strange way of working out, of turning painful moments into unexpected opportunities. The challenge that was meant to humiliate him had instead revealed his talent to the world. The cruel girl who tried to hurt him had become one of his closest friends and most dedicated collaborators. Marcus reached his apartment and sat at his piano, the beautiful instrument Victoria had insisted on buying for him when he first started at the conservatory. He played quietly, not practicing for his concert, but just playing for himself, for the pure joy of making music. This was who he was at his core, not a famous pianist or a foundation director, but simply someone who loved music and wanted to share that love with the world. The next morning, Marcus received an email that made his heart skip. It was from a social worker in Chicago who had heard about the initiative. She was writing about a 10-year-old boy in foster care who had been caught sneaking into a local community center after hours to play their piano. The boy had no formal training but could play complex pieces by ear after hearing them just once or twice. The social worker thought he might be a good candidate for the program. Marcus immediately forwarded the email to Victoria with a note saying they needed to reach out to this boy as soon as possible. Then he sat back in his chair and smiled. There was another talented kid out there who needed help, another life that could be changed, another story that deserved a chance to unfold. The work continued, and it mattered, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be.